Internet television network that's truly plugged in. 866-224-5422. That's AMP2.TV. The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. It's Monday night at 9. Time for Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel, a certified sex therapist and sexuality educator. Dr. Siegel is here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality that you might not have known who to ask. He'll also welcome special guests to talk about a wide variety of topics within the fascinating world of sexuality. So, welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening. It's Monday night, and we're back. Thanks for joining us. Ricky Siegel, my brother Larry Siegel, and it's time for Sex Talk. We were kind of blown off course last week by Hurricane Irma. So thanks for coming back and joining us after a week off.
Hope everybody made it through okay.
Yeah, all our local listeners. I hope you fared well and have electricity to be listening to the radio or watching us on Facebook. You know, I was thinking about storms, and you know, I think nobody but sex people talk about these kind of things that, you know, in natural disasters, like preparation kits and things like that. You know, that's the one thing that gets left off the list.
Sure.
Right? There's sex, and unfortunately there's sexual assault that often are part of these kind of disasters. And there's, you know, everybody's watching Jim Cantori get thrown around in the street, that nobody's really talking about some serious issues that are happening. Sometimes it could be fun. People are locked up with no electricity and, you know, there's nothing else to do. And again, you know, they're running to the pharmacy to make sure grandma has her medicine. Do they have condoms and birth control?
Birth control pills, right. That you don't hear that, you know, water. Right, canned foods, extra batteries for your vibrator too, but you don't hear that, right? So yeah, that's
prep kits, sure,
absolutely. But I think it's, you know, it's also a good thing to point out that when there are a lot of disasters, and we even see this within what's going on in St. Louis and you know, wherever there's a lot of just really turmoil going on, not just natural disasters, that is this little undercurrent that we don't really hear about, that there often is this little pocket where we do see an increase in sexual assaults.
Yeah.
When there's any kind of you know, activity like that.
Yeah. I mean, even if I think just from a place of like first responders being unavailable, and you know, maybe creeps and predators feel more like they're likely to get away with it and go on.
Kind of like a looting mentality.
Yeah, very much so. So it's Sex Talk. We're here to answer your questions. Please feel free to call us at 888-565-1470. Or if you're watching live on Facebook, just hit that little send email button and I'll see it. You can send us some questions. Anything you've ever wanted to know and didn't know where to ask, like our promo says.
Right. Or if you didn't know you wanted to know. Well, I'll take that too.
Maybe something we said ticks you off and makes you want to pick up the phone and get into it. We welcome it. You know, sex is... ends up being controversial even when we don't want it to be, right? We've been saying this for the 25, 30 years respectively we've been at this work, that, you know, I wish it wasn't political. People often accuse us, like after lectures, of, you know, why do you guys make it so political? This came up today, as a matter of fact, in your class. But I promise we didn't make it political, and I guarantee you, I assure you we wish it wasn't. But you know, sexuality and social justice issues. You know, we talk about this, the inequity. It seems it comes up for us even here on the show a lot. The role of women and, well, sex is political.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of, again, you mentioned social justice. A lot of those issues around social justice, particularly that are focused on the welfare of women, we can go back thousands of years and see where that's always been kind of a stumbling block. That's been something that's been consistent, that, you know, I'll use the term repression of women, if not oppression of women, has been, I think, the mainstay of conservative politics since the beginning of conservative politics. And we hear a lot now when you look at whether we're talking about reproductive rights, particularly for women. When we look at access to not only abortion, but access to birth control. I think it's even telling when we look at the fact that we have a number of different options available for women in terms of preventing pregnancy, but since the ancient Egyptians, have we had anything for men other than condoms?
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that this stuff has been around for thousands of years, including condoms. So where has the evolution been? Right? When we look at probably the one of the greatest figures in the history of family planning, Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood and a public health nurse who did this in reaction to what she saw happening to women, especially poor immigrant women, you know, and the fight and the struggle that she went through, and all that has been accomplished. You know, I often wonder if Margaret Sanger was still alive, would she be happy? Right? Would she be proud of where we've come, or would she see that we haven't really come very far in a lot of ways? Some ways, yeah. But in a lot of ways, we haven't.
It always seems strange to me, even after all these years of doing this work, to think about what motivates. Obviously, you know, we have our biases, and probably a little bit to the left of center, a little bit. But, you know, I can't help but think that the religion plays a role in this kind of conservative politics. But I just can't fathom what is it about the idea of birth control that's so scandalous and outrageous to people and sinful that a woman wants to enjoy sex without the worry of getting pregnant, and we have the technology to be able to do that effectively and safely. Why is that a controversy?
Well, I think you answered that in using the word sinful. When we go back, and again, I think when you go really back all, you know, early biblical times, the idea of preventing pregnancy, just like people, very conservative religious people today would say, well, no, you can't mess around with that. That's God's domain. And if you're meant to get pregnant, you should accept it as a gift from God. And trying to prevent that, trying to make yourself, you know, sort of more available. That's the sin. A lot of people don't realize, you know, go back to Genesis, right? Go back to Adam and Eve, what got them kicked out of the Garden of Eden and all of us damned for eternity. You know, I often ask, is it possible for millions and millions of people to get it wrong for thousands of years? And the answer is yes. Because people get that whole story wrong. And it has to do with this idea of sin. Right? We look at sin as this sort of moral judgment, right or wrong. But back in those days, sin meant selfish. And particularly selfish at the expense of others. And when people read the story of Genesis, if they follow the bouncing ball kind of thing, find out where in the story, now, first of all, which story? There's a couple of versions of Genesis. But if we follow the bouncing ball and see where in the story does God get angry and does, you know, bring up his ire, it's not disobeying. It's not eating the apple. It is covering up their nakedness. And that was original sin, because they made their discomfort and their self-consciousness more important than what God bestowed upon them. And isn't it ironic that religion in particular continues to perpetuate that same thing?
Right, the same shame. But, you know, to the reproductive technology thing, it's also a bit, I can't help but think it's hypocritical that there's all this opposition to preventing pregnancy, but no objection whatsoever to fertility assisted, fertility assisting technology. These Octomom has the parade of babies marching out of her, and religious conservatives don't object to that.
Well, she's being fruitful and multiplying.
I think we got that. I think all of us can rest assured we've been fruitful enough. We've got more people than the planet can support, and But just, you know, again, it still goes back to that role of sex and what a woman's job is.
Exactly.
And, right, you know, the early days of before abortion was illegalized, which, again, a lot of people don't realize. It was not the church. It was the nascent medical community that was trying to get rid of midwives and, you know, competition that pushed the church into illegalizing
right. The Catholic Church actually supported abortion, particularly for poor women.
Right. But there was, you know, it led to this feeling that women were just being lazy. That your job is to be a mother. What you know, you're shirking your responsibility.
Right. And maybe not necessarily lazy, but selfish.
There's again, selfish.
Because again, when you look at the whole point behind something like birth control, it is for women to be able to have a life of their own.
Right. How dare they?
And
how dare they not be
really
wife
how
and mother?
dare they?
Right.
Because that's not what the biblical pattern was supposed to be. Women were supposed to be to serve men, to be the family, and to basically be wife and mother. That was the identity. To be woman, to be self, that was kind of a violation of the sort of expected standard.
Until Cosmo magazine came along. Right?
On the one hand, the best thing that ever happened to female sexuality, and the worst thing that ever happened to female sexuality. And I often describe that because the best thing, right, 1963, 1964, when it first came out, it was really the first time publicly, especially in a mass media kind of context, women were given permission to be sexual.
I don't think it took till the 70s, right? The birth control pill, and you know, I really think Cosmo might have started then, but I don't know. I think it took a while.
It took a while to catch on, sure, but this was really the first vehicle for women, to give them, and I hate to use this phrase, but to give them permission to not only have sex for themselves, but to enjoy it. And it started teaching women about understanding their own orgasms.
Right.
But it then very quickly started to...
What's the matter with you? Why aren't you having multiple orgasms and hanging from the chandelier?
Exactly right. Neighbors pounding on the ceiling, you know, and that kind of orgasm in multiples. Right. And if you don't have a partner who's giving those to you, get rid of them and find something else. So it really took a turn, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think it followed, and I'll be a little bit, you know, surprised, be a little critical. I think, you know, when you look at the different phases and the different eras of feminism, when we look at that third wave of feminism, which this is kind of like that part of, I think they really missed the boat. I think there was a great opportunity for women in that movement to help elevate relationships, to elevate men, to elevate sex and sexuality. But I think all it really did for a lot of people is end up being a way of trying to prove that a woman can be as big of a jerk as a man. Right?
Yeah, a lot of anger, a lot of bashing. Right?
Yeah.
We still see a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think it was a real missed opportunity. All right, so, and, you know, any women that are listening to that, please, you know, if you want to comment on that, 888-565-1470, would love to hear from you. But I think that's still a legacy that we're playing out.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, you know, there's this dynamic where men have also gotten confused, right? Because men have always had a hard time trying to figure out their role, you know, throughout the 20th century.
Sure. Right.
And when
we went from John Wayne to John Bradshaw, right?
Right, exactly. And when you look at these sort of the role models that we see in the media, right? Go back to the 30s and the 40s, you know, your Edgar G. Robinsons, your Spencer Tracy's going to the 40s and through the 50s, who were smacking women around.
Yeah.
You know,
Ralph Cramden. Right?
Ralph Cramden.
One of these days, Alice.
Right.
Bang, zoom.
Now, granted, I think that was the joke, was that, you know, and it was really to ridicule that kind of attitude. But it was also, you know, this shift from men dominating women to, you mentioned John Wayne, right? Then we had this strong, silent type. John Wayne never got laid. He never got the woman. He always went into the sunset by himself. All right?
It's weird. It's really weird.
And then in the 70s, right? Again, with some of the social movement, we have the kind of Alan Alda type, the sensitive man, the man who understands your needs, the man who can cry. And we started to see a lot of that, where women were even asking their men, let me see your emotion. I want to see your feeling, which really meant, I want to see you cry. And then a lot of these guys would say, all right, you know what? I'm secure enough in my manhood. I can validate myself. I can allow myself to be vulnerable. I'll show my partner that I can cry, and I'll cry in front of her.
Yeah.
And now he's a weenie, and she runs from him back into the arms of the alpha male.
Yeah. Or it becomes another one of those manipulative ploys by the alpha male.
Sure.
Right? Remember that classic line from, what was it, Mo Better Blues, right? I'll love you forever. Tonight.
Right.
And that kind of...
But see, that was also in this that followed, if you look in the 80s, the action hero.
Right.
We have your Bruce Willises, we have your Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, again, never had sex, but they sublimated that by killing a lot of people. Right? I think there was one study that showed that Arnold Schwarzenegger, in most of his movies through the 80s, as the good guy, had an average of 400 kills per movie, and the worst bad guy never killed more than 2.
Yeah.
If that many.
Right. Well, you know, that's the wholesome family entertainment that Bob Dole was crying for.
And the sublimation of sex.
Right. When Dole was running for president, I remember he was griping about the smut coming out of Hollywood and how we needed more wholesome family entertainment, like Independence Day.
Right.
That was his go-to example, right? The Earth being destroyed by aliens and people being vaporized and cut in half with machine gun fire. Put the kids down in front of that.
Right.
God forbid somebody showing some affection or touching one another. That's smut and pornography. And
right. Meanwhile, this is the same person that was in a Viagra ad leering and leching over Britney Spears, who at the time was an adolescent.
No, he was, if you remember, it was his wife. Yeah, they were hawking Viagra, but even creepier, it was like a Diet Coke or a Diet Pepsi commercial, where Britney was still sporting the slutty, the virgin slut look, when she was the just post Mouseketeer, and on the big screen with the belly skirt doing the thing, and Bob Dole in the easy chair with the dog on the floor, and the dog whimpers, and he goes, "Easy boy," right? Like the two old lechery dogs. Yeah. Oh, that was the epitome
really
of creepy.
Yeah, it really was. So it's not any surprise that I think people in general are kind of confused about sexuality, about sex roles, about our expectations. And I think that's kind of what brought us to where we are today, where, it's sort of a free-for-all, right? People are defining things for themselves. I want to think of myself this way, so I can. We've had this conversation a number of times before. I do not really think that there's anything empowering or even supportive of this alphabet soup of non-heterosexual identities. Because again, we set it up, you're either heterosexual or you're LGBTQI, Q, Y, G. I mean, this whole, I find it ridiculous and incredibly narcissistic.
You used an important word a couple weeks ago, that othering. Right?
Yeah.
That perpetuating the othering.
Yeah.
Right? If we're talking about whatever alphabet soup of sexual orientation, if it doesn't have an H in there for heterosexual, it's continuing to other.
But I think there's that what people themselves do, which again, a little kind of bratty aspect to it, where don't tell me what I am. This is how I feel, and therefore this is how you have to address me or acknowledge. And I can't, what comes into my mind when I think about that? The South Park episode with Randy Marsh, where he becomes a dolphin. So because he feels like he's a dolphin, does that mean we have to accept he's a dolphin?
A trans-species operation.
Yeah.
I hate to correct you, but it was Broflovsky.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. That's right. It wasn't Randy.
He was upset because the plastic surgeon gave his son Kyle a race change operation because he wanted to be tall and black to play basketball, not a short Jewish kid.
Right.
Yeah, South Park is the best at absurdity, at social commentary, at satire, and when it comes to sex and drugs, nobody does it better. We could teach our entire sex ed course with South Park episodes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You think Palm Beach State College would go for that?
No.
I think we'd need another job.
No, I don't think they have either the imagination or the cojones.
Yeah.
To allow something progressive.
Yeah, that would be pretty progressive. Yeah, maybe we can do it online, I'm sure, with all the other projects. So sex is political, and politics breeds sexual scandal way too often, right? There's so much
those two ideas go
hypocrisy
together.
that comes along with trying to regulate or... I guess ultimately it's, as you were saying before with women, the attempt to control. Except, now we have people in power who want to control everyone.
But I think, there is certainly that element, of everybody should be the way I think they should be. But I also think that there's very much this sort of Freudian reaction formation element to it.
Yeah.
And again, the first name that comes to my mind with that is Larry Craig.
Sure.
Right? Who, as a political crusader against homosexuality, against same-sex rights and marriage equality, and he has made a career out of being this political homophobe and
supporting family values
and all about family values. That's right.
Right.
And again,
busted in a men's room.
In the men's room,
defending himself with a wide
stance.
Yeah.
Right.
Larry Flint from Hustler magazine said this years ago that a political scandal, you can almost bet that if it's about money, it's a Democrat, and if it's about sex, it's a Republican. And I really can't help but think, A, that he's probably right, and B, it owes to that kind of hypocrisy that, generally speaking, liberal folks don't go around spouting these, virtues and morals and telling people how to live the way they claim to until they get busted in some lascivious affair or with their pants down. From you couldn't get any bigger profile than the televangelist Ted Haggard.
Ted Haggard.
Who fall from grace, Jimmy Swaggart. The list just goes on and on of all of these busted hypocrites that reveal we're all sexual beings. We're all capable of struggling with impulse control or the emotional rather than the intellectual parts of dealing with sexual impulses and being human.
Sure.
Right? And making mistakes and betraying relationships and the issue again, we talked about affairs and infidelity a couple of weeks ago. I don't think we have time to get back into it, but a lot of the same rules apply. To be mature and grown up enough to be able to talk about these things, to admit that someone can be in a relationship and still be longing and mourning a loss, especially a relationship that feels dead.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Again, we always end up quoting our dear friend Esther Perel and eagerly anticipating her new book in October on infidelity and rethinking affairs. I think the book is called The State of Affairs.
The State of Affairs,
Rethinking Infidelity. And as a sex therapist, helping couples get past... she makes this point beautifully. Yeah, everybody gets the betrayal point, part of it. That an affair is a betrayal of an agreement, and people are angry and hurt. Therapists usually get that, and more often than not, align with the betrayed.
Right.
But the second part of it, they don't get. The part that the longing and, that mourning that motivated. Somebody who feels so invisible, and somebody could be married, in a relationship, with a family, with a house full of people, and still feel alone and invisible.
Absolutely.
And a coworker says, "Oh, you look really nice today," or "I missed you yesterday," and all of a sudden they feel special and alive and
that's
noticed
and appreciated and attractive.
Right.
Exactly. And and it goes by. I often anger a lot of people, especially women who have experienced infidelity, when I say that the person who was cheated on has as much responsibility in that dynamic as the person who did it.
That's a tough conversation to have.
I know. Well, again, we have to really make a distinction between responsibility and fault or blame.
Right.
Not saying it's their fault and it's not them to blame, but they contributed to that dynamic.
It's a relationship problem.
Exactly.
Right. You know, how many people are cheating on their honeymoon? Or looking at porn, or all the other things that end up being held up as signs of some kind of mental illness or disease or moral issue. These are relationship problems.
Right. And the context for sex in that relationship. Right? And, you know, as we've mentioned before, people generally don't talk about this stuff. So, you know, there are these implicit agreements, but there's no real explicit contract that we know. You know, I know what to expect of you. I just assume what I'm going to expect of you. Right? We don't have a conversation. We don't really say, okay, this is what this means. This is what I want. This is where I draw the line. Right? So as a result, you know, and again, we've said this before too, people are failing tests they never even knew they were taking.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of, that's a hard one to avoid.
Yeah.
You know, there's really no winning in a situation like that. And there are no winners in a situation like that, which is why we end up getting this sort of very one-sided victim-perpetrator dynamic when it comes to infidelity, as opposed to we both brought us to this point. How do we both move forward? Right? And that's why I like the framing of narratives and stories. You know, okay, this story we thought we were in up until this point, this chapter is over. The story is not necessarily over, but it's what are we going to write together from this point forward? What's the story going to be from this point forward? And we're going to write it together instead of both of us in our own little corners writing our own essays, as it were. All right. So I think that's one of these big points, especially for therapists, like you said, to not get that moving forward part. Right? Yeah, you're right. They get the betrayal. They get why this person is hurting.
Yeah.
Right? But they don't seem to get the sense of what those dynamics really are.
How do we heal? How do we save a relationship and move it past? How do we get the infidelity, whatever the crisis was, behind us? Right? Any therapists listening? If we've piqued your curiosity, please get in touch with us and find out about Modern Sex Therapy Institutes, where we train psychotherapists and medical clinicians in sex therapy and sexuality counseling and sexual medicine. I can be reached if anyone is interested in psychotherapy services or sex therapy services. You can get a hold of me by sending an email to ricky@modernsextherapy.com. Send us an email for some questions for next week's show, and Larry and I will be back here next Monday with a special guest, Ann Shiro Rising, who is following us on this very station. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Have a
You'll
great
be in
week.
for a treat. Thank you.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel. Join us every Monday night at 9 on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.